Once upon a time, in a room full of wonders, where every step leads to magic, and the journey of a true story begins here, with amazing guests and true miracles. Please like and subscribe for more amazing videos.
Thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast. I'm very thrilled. Well, my background is that I was raised in Salem, Oregon, and my parents had 5 children. I was the fourth out of 5. And my mom ended up being, when I was a teenager, she became a police officer in Salem, Oregon. And my father worked for the state of Oregon. And so I had a regular childhood, riding my bike and with my little sister and doing fun things. But I also had a difference than my siblings, and my mom used to notice it quite a bit. I had a really strong intuition, and I would know when something was going to happen, or if somebody was calling on the phone, I would know who was calling. And my mom would be really freaked out about it and look at me and go, where did you come from? How do you, why are you knowing that? And so it was, regular life moving forward. I ended up in Santa Barbara, California, when I was about 27 years old. And I had married someone down here who had met me up in Oregon, and the person didn't really show themselves who they really were when they started dating me and got me to marry them. And after we got married, I started being hurt by the person physically and controlled, manipulated. I was young. I had never been exposed to anything like that before. I thought that maybe I could help the person change and make difference in his life. But it was really traumatic, and I had been married up in Oregon for a short period of time. So I had a son by a previous marriage, and he was with me here in California. And I had a really rough time with this person getting angry over small things at his work or things that we didn't do right at home as far as he was concerned. And he would hit me, push me, shove me, kick me, etc. So when I was 31, I had left him for a whole year, and I had told him that if he got counseling, which I had tried to help him get and tried to help him get into, and he refused, I left him and I said, if you do counseling, I may consider coming back. I'm not going to keep on being hurt like this. So he lied to me at the end of the year and told me that he'd gotten counseling and that he'd corrected the problem. And he convinced me of that. And so my son and I moved back in with him. And I got pregnant sometime after that point in time and delivered the baby, 9 months later. And about a month after the baby was born, he called me outside to the patio of our home and said, come over here. And he had a 2x4 on his shoulder that was down to the ground, and it was underneath 5 bags of cement. And it was like he was prying them up. I didn't know what he was doing. And I, said, what are you doing? And he said, doesn't matter, get over here. And he ended up pulling on my arm and pulling me underneath the board that he had on his shoulder. And because he was taller than me, when he moved his shoulder away, the board came down on my shoulder and it blew a disc out of my back. My spinal portion of my back, my L5-S1 disc, just exploded. So I crumpled to the ground, screamed bloody murder. It was terrible pain. I've never felt anything like that before. And he just walked away. And it turned out that it was causing me not to be able to walk. So after I went to the first doctor, who told me that I would never walk again, friends of mine said, no, you need to go to a neurosurgeon. And so I took the medical records to a neurosurgeon, and he said that he could fix it. So he scheduled surgery for me in December of 1987. My little daughter was only 5 months old. My son was 8 years old. And I went to the hospital to get the surgery. And I went in the night before because the doctors told me they wanted to do one additional test before the next morning's early morning surgery. And so they were doing a myelogram, and it's injecting iodine dye into your spinal cord, and you're laying on an x-ray table, and then they tip the x-ray table so that the dye will run down your spinal cord, because they injected it behind my neck, and they just numbed the area, injected the dye in, and then they were supposed to tip the table so the dye would run down my spine. Unfortunately, the two x-ray techs weren't paying a lot of attention, I guess, and the one that was pushing the button on the table just started tipping it the wrong way. And the two doctors were talking to each other. They were in the room, but they weren't paying attention to the table either. And it turned out that within a minute, I was feeling like I was going to faint. And I thought, I need to interrupt the x-ray techs. They were talking to each other, and I couldn't speak, and I couldn't reach my hand out to touch them to get their attention. So I laid there, and quickly my eyes started rolling to the back of my head. I couldn't control them. And then I started hyperventilating, and I was breathing like, and with my eyes rolling to the back of my head. So the one x-ray tech that had his finger on the button, he stopped talking to the other one, and he leaned over my body and looked at my face, and then he leaned backwards to look to see where his thumb was on the machine. And that's when he realized he had tipped the machine the wrong way, and his face reflected that, like, and so that was the last thing that I saw. My eyes in my body shut, and 1 second later, I was up on the ceiling, and it felt like the ceiling, like it was against the back of my head, but of course I didn't have a body or anything up there, but I felt a barrier, and I was looking down at the whole scene below me, and I had been feeling panicked in my body down below, but I felt complete calm when I was up on the ceiling, and I looked down and said, if I'm up here and my body is down there and he's calling code blue, I think I just died. And I'd never heard of the near-death experience. I'd never been a meditator. I'd never tried spiritual things. I just had gone to church, but not extensively. I always felt a connection to God, but it wasn't because of church. It was because I felt that connection even when I was a little child. And so I ended up feeling a being that was right next to me. Once I was up on the ceiling and I looked down, the minute I said that, there was a being that was next to me, and it felt so eternal and so loving and accepting, and I felt like I was just wrapped in this blanket of love and acceptance. And I said to the being, if you could please put me back into my body, please let me go back into my life, because if I leave at this time in this way, then my children will be abused and I won't be there to protect them. I need to go back into my life, please. And so I was saying that as I was watching down below, the doctors yelling orders. An oxygen cart came in. The two x-ray techs had been doing CPR on me. The nurse that was over at the table by the door was calling for a defib unit, saying stat, screaming into the phone. Finally, this man came in, and he had this box, and this metal box in his hand, and he went towards the end of the table where my feet were and went around on the far side, and he put the box on a ledge that was over on the wall, and he started peeling off these little round white things and putting them on my chest. And I had never seen a heart monitor before. I didn't know what that was. And so in the midst of saying to the being, please, I want to go back into my life, I stopped and I said, I understand what everyone else is doing, but what is he doing? And the minute that I said that in my head to the being, I was moved down. My consciousness was right in front of the box, maybe a foot in front of the box. And I watched as the man's hand went across my face like this, and he hit a toggle switch on the side of the box, and this area that was glass at the top of the box that was rectangular had this little light in it, and it started going in a straight line across the screen, and it was making this monotone sound going beep. Well, I didn't know what it was. I'd never seen a heart monitor. I didn't watch TV. I still don't. And so I didn't know what it was, and I was looking at it, watching it go across the screen, and it went across the first time, a second time, and then the third time, about a third of the way over, all of a sudden it occurred to me, I think that little dot's supposed to be going up and down. Oh, that's my heart. It stopped. And so then the second that I thought that, then I was moved back up on the ceiling with the being again, and again said, I really would like to go back into my life. Please let me go back. And so the neurosurgeon was talking to the orthopedic surgeon, and he said, too much time has passed. She's going to be brain dead. We need to do something. And the orthopedic surgeon said, stand clear. And everybody backed away from the table, and he stepped 2 steps forwards, took his fist from behind his back, and smacked it down on my chest. And when he did that, up on the ceiling, I didn't go back out of my, up there and back into my body, but I watched my body jerk from that blow. And then the being up on the ceiling finally spoke to me. And this beautifully calm voice said, but if you go back, you'll still be in your marriage. What will you do? And then showed these film clips that just went flash, 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 flash. And it was all these incidents that I had been living through with this husband, of him pushing, kicking me, shoving me, yelling at me, everything that he'd been doing. And it was like to remind me of what I had been trying to forgive and forget. And I was trying to keep the marriage together and had been trying to, make it work. And it wasn't. And so after I saw all those little film clips, then I was given the time to think about what I had done to try to help him change. And after I thought of all the things that I had done, I realized that he couldn't change and that I needed to change. And so what I said to the being was, if you let me go back, I promise you I'll get strong enough to leave him. And the minute I said the word him, the doctor did a second precardial thump, and my eyes shut up on the ceiling, and I opened my eyes, and I was back in my body with the oxygen mask on my face. I remembered everything that had happened up on the ceiling, and I'd watched everything that had happened down below, and I had wide eyes, and I said, what just happened, to the doctor. And the nurse ended up leaning over me and saying, stop, don't talk, we need to stabilize you. And so 20 minutes later, they finally took the oxygen mask off. And when they did that, then I said to the 2 doctors who were standing next to the table, what just happened? I was up on the ceiling and I could see and hear everything. And the neurosurgeon went, oh, brother. And then I said, no, I was up on the ceiling. She was calling for the defib unit over there at the desk. That lady brought in the oxygen cart. That man brought in the heart monitor. I watched it flatlining. You said to him too much time had passed. He came over and hit me twice, and I recounted what had happened. And while I was doing that, he clenched his fists and pulled him up next to his body, the neurosurgeon did, and then he yelled, I am not going to stand here and listen to this. And he stormed out of the room. But then the orthopedic surgeon very kindly took my hand as I was laying there on the table and said, tell me, what did it feel like? What did you see? Tell me again what you saw. Tell me, and he completely validated the whole experience with everyone else watching except for the neurosurgeon. And then they ended up putting me onto a gurney and sending me up to my room, but no one in the hospital that came into my room to do vitals or anything, no one would tell me anything. And I kept asking what happened during my myelogram, and everybody would deny anything that had happened. And so The next morning, they did the surgery, and afterwards, the two doctors came into the recovery area, and I was laying on a bed, and they walked towards me, and I said, "What happened during my myelogram?" And then the neurosurgeon went, "I am not here to talk about that," and held his hand, straight at me and said, "I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about your surgery." So he shut me down again. And then when I got out of the hospital 4 days later, I needed to go to back to his appointment, to an appointment at his office another week and a half later. And when I asked him then, he also did the hand out and shut me down and said, "I'm not going to talk about that." So I know that they were worried about lawsuit with the hospital and themselves. That's not what I was intending. I never sued anybody. I just wanted to know what had happened, because I'd never heard of that situation. And of course, I didn't even know it was called a near-death experience, so I couldn't research it. And I wasn't going to go to a library, since we didn't have the internet back then, and say, "Well, I died, and hey, do you have anything in books about that?" So I couldn't research it. I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I didn't talk about it for like 12 years. So I felt very like it was a very beautiful gift inside my heart. When I would think about it, I could look down and I could actually see the room, that from the above point in the ceiling where I was looking down when I was dead. It was very clear. It was very real. It was very beautiful. And many years went by, like 12, and I ended up having a business here in Santa Barbara. And then when I closed it, I was invited to go to a conference. And it was because I had gone online by then, found that there was an organization actually called Near Death Experience Research Foundation. And it's run by Dr. Jeffrey Long. And he has about 5,000 or more near-death experiences categorized on his site. So I thought, hey, I'm going to go ahead and just briefly explain my near-death experience and post it on his site. So he ended up calling me and inviting me to the conference for the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And that's a worldwide organization that meets every year and has a conference. A lot of researchers, a lot of near-death experiencers attend it. So I went to it because it was in San Diego. It wasn't too far from Santa Barbara. And I went down to it, and I got to meet 50 near-death experiencers there. And that helped me to completely come out of my shell and start talking about it. And so I ended up starting the near-death experience group here in Santa Barbara, which is part of the IANS, which is that International Association for Near-Death Studies. And I've had it for 15 years now. So I bring experiencers to Santa Barbara, and they talk at my group once a month. And I'm now been told that I'm the largest group on the West Coast. So I can have anywhere from 60 to 150 people show up at the meetings. And it's really beautiful. People are really, connected. And I also have an experiencers group, that those people that designate that they have had an experience, whether it be a near-death experience or a shared death experience, an out-of-body experience, anything that's spiritually transformative, can come to a second meeting that I have each month. And we just let them talk to each other so that they can feel comfortable in getting to know their own experience and others' experiences, so that they can acclimate to it. So I've really gained so much from my experience. I can't even imagine not having it in my life. It was the beautiful change in my whole world. And as a youngster, my mom recognized some of the signs, and she would get freaked out about me knowing what was going to happen or knowing who was calling on the phone. But also other times I've had experiences where I knew what was going to happen, and I scared, like high school friends of mine. And I've saved a couple lives with what happened, knowing what was going to happen. And it's been beautiful all the way through to know that we don't we don't end when we die, that we just leave our physical body and we are, I think, someplace else in a different realm, a different level of energy. And I really feel that I look forward to going home permanently at some point. And I call home home because I don't believe in heaven and hell. I don't believe there's any judgment whatsoever. There wasn't anything like that in my experience, and I don't believe anyone is judged. And I think that's hard for some people to believe because some people are out there creating bad situations in their lives. But I think that you're forgiven when you go home, and you have this experience to grow your soul. I also feel, after having this in my life for so long now, that we're here many times. We're not just here once. So we come down here, we plan a life with experiences that are going to grow us and grow who we are. And we go through that life, and then we go back home again for however long, and then we come back down again. And I've been told it's a soul group that we travel together with. And so I recognize that as being truthful as well. And so it's just wonderful to have it in your life, because I don't fear death at all. It makes me a little braver in life. And I actually one time was downtown in Santa Barbara, and there was a group of 5 boys that were running up the middle of the main street in Santa Barbara. And I was in my car, and I had my 2 daughters in the car with me. And one was like 3rd grade and one was junior high. And I saw that 4 of the guys that were running up the street knocked the one that was in front down right in front of a large building, and they were kneeling on both sides of him and punching him. All 4 people were punching this one guy laying down on his back. So since I don't have any fear of death, told my daughters to stay in the car, got out, started to walk across the street. Of course, I was stopping traffic by leaving my car right where it was. And the man behind me yelled at me, "Hey, lady, what do you think you're doing?" And so I said, "Well, I'm going over to intervene in that situation. You could assist me." And he said, "No, I'm not going to get involved." And that just took my fury and just completely blew it up. So by the time that I walked across the one lane to get over to where the guys were on the sidewalk, I was madder than heck. And I just grabbed the backs of the sweatshirts of 2 of the guys that were on one side of the guy's body. And I looked at both the other 2 guys on the opposite side, and I had my head down right at the same level as them. And I just used fury. And I said, "Stop it right now." And the 2 guys across from me just felt all that fury, and they got up and ran. And then the 2 guys that I was holding on the sweatshirts, because their 2 partners had gotten up and ran, they ran. And I picked up the young man who was on the ground on his back. He was 19 years old, and they weren't just punching him. One of the 4 people was getting jumped into a gang from Oxnard, California, which is about 40 miles south of us. And he had been assigned to kill someone. So he was stabbing that 19-year-old boy in the chest area with a sharpened screwdriver. And I didn't, of course, know that. And so I took that 19-year-old boy, drove him to the hospital, and saved his life. And, had no fear for myself at all. And, it's just, I've had done so many things that have blown my husband's mind. That another one was that we were driving north of Santa Barbara, and it's called Gaviota, and it's really windy. And we were there at night coming home from San Francisco. I had done 5 talks up in San Francisco, and my husband was driving, and our Toyota van, was getting hit with this big gusts of wind. But I was laying back in my seat thinking, we're just a half an hour from home. I'm so happy. And I didn't worry anything. I wasn't worried. But then this big gust of wind hit the side of our van, and I watched as my husband was struggling to keep our van under control. And I realized, wow, we could tip over, we could crash. This is scary. And so I talked to my husband and said, hey, I think we need to slow down. I don't think we should do anywhere near 65. I think we should do like 50 miles an hour. And he said, yeah, I think so too. So he slowed down to 50, and I thought, okay, we're okay now, even though the gusts of wind are happening, and I think we're okay. So we're driving along, and all of a sudden I heard in my ear, danger, big impact ahead, danger, big impact. And so I was like, oh my God. So I sat up in my seat because I had been laying backwards, put my seatbelt nice and tight against me. And then I looked at my husband and said, you know how I sometimes hear from the other side? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, I just heard danger, big impact ahead, danger, big impact. So we need to slow down further so that we can have stopping time. Let's do 30 miles an hour. And my husband looked at me in shock and said, Barbara, we're on the freeway. We can't do 30. And I turned around and looked through the back of our van, and there were no cars behind us and nobody in front of us. And it was 9:30 at night, and usually that freeway's pretty busy. So that was a weird thing. I didn't think of it right in that moment, but I said, no one's around us. Nobody's going to care if we're doing 30 miles an hour. And so my husband said, you're right. Okay. And I said, if somebody, starts coming up behind us, then go ahead and speed up. So we're going along at 30 miles an hour for like 10 minutes and nobody caught up to us. What we didn't know was that the California Highway Patrol had closed the freeway behind us. No one was going to catch up to us because there was a blockade. And so no one knew what was up ahead, not even us. Well, we came around a corner and we saw one single police car's lights in the dark. And I thought, well, somebody's probably getting a ticket. But as we got closer and closer, I felt that's where the danger is. And I knew that it was up there. So I was intently watching through the windshield, like, what is up there? What is it? And as we got closer, we saw that the police car wasn't stopped off the side of the highway. It was stopped in the slow lane, blocking it. And we were going to have to go from the slow lane into the fast lane to go around it. And just as we started to change lanes to go around it, someone from the other side grabbed both of my upper arms. I felt these clenched fingers on both my upper arms, which freaked me out. And also I saw a shimmer of a face in front of my face, and it looked see-through. And I heard 10 miles an hour screamed at me. And I was so freaked that they were touching me, that I saw the shimmer, that the 10 miles an hour screamed, that I echoed the 10 miles an hour and screamed it at Victor. And he had just changed into the fast lane. So as we were approaching the police car, he slowed down to where when he got to the police car, he was doing 10 miles an hour. He went rolling past the police car in the fast lane, and about 30, maybe 40 feet beyond the police car, our lights finally lit up. The semi-truck that had turned over on its side across the whole entire freeway, and the dirty bottom of the truck was facing us, so there were no reflectors or anything, and we were headed right for the cab of the truck, which was in the fast lane. And because we were doing 10 miles an hour, we were able to swerve off to the left side of the freeway and go around the front of the truck and not hit it, because that's where the gas tanks are. And when we got to the far side of the truck, I looked up, and the police officer was standing, bracing himself up, against the wind that was blowing, and talking to the truck driver who was trapped inside the truck. And he looked up when he saw our lights come around the front of the truck and looked shocked. And then my husband didn't know that I had just seen him, and he continued to drive and went down the freeway further. And I began saying thank you to God. I said, thank you for the truck driver's life. Thank you for the police officer's life. Thank you for our lives, for doing that for us. I appreciate it so much. I'm here for you. I'm here to always do whatever you need me to do. Just put people in front of me and I'll help. And so then my husband, about 10 minutes later, he was completely quiet. He just watched that whole thing happen. And he goes, Barbara, how is it that you were able to do that? If I had not been in this car watching that whole thing, I never would have believed this story. And I said, well, it's not me doing anything, Victor, but listening. And I said, the other side wants to help us, and we call it intuition, but it's not us, it's them. So when you hear your intuition, believe it, understand it, and understand that someone's trying to help you on the other side, and listen to it. So my husband listens to me when I tell him that something is coming from the other side, and he is really supportive of me. I'm really lucky for that, because some men would probably nah, nah, and say no, it's not real or whatever. My husband is not like that. So I'm really lucky, and I have a happy life in Santa Barbara, and I love the changes that it made for me in my life. And I really, and my current husband, I married him. It's really kind of cute how I found him. I left the bad guy, and I was alone, and I didn't want to date anybody. And then after about a year, I thought, well, if I ever do date anybody, I want to make sure they're a good person this next time around. So I started writing a list of character traits. And at night, when I would go to bed, I would look at the list and add more things that I could think of, only positive things. And then I would say, God, I don't know who this person is, but I know that you do. And if you could bring him to me and in a safe way so that I could check him out and make sure that he's these character traits, and in a good timing for his life and for my life, I'd really appreciate it. And thank you and good night. So I did that for a whole year. And then my son came one day. He was now in 8th grade at junior high. And he came one day to our apartment with a girl that was in 7th grade. And they wanted to go to a movie. So they talked me into taking them to a movie. And then they told me to come over to her house to get them. And when I went over 15 minutes later to her house, my current husband I knocked on the door, and my current husband opened it. And so it ended up that the two kids were putting us together, because we were able to go on dates with all of our kids. He had two and I had two. We were able to see each other's reactions to each other's children and test each other out. And so 6 months to the day from the day that we met, the kids introduced us, we got married, and it's been 32 years with a good guy instead of something else. So, yeah, it's really been a wonderful life. So I think, one of the aspects of it is that don't live with someone who's being horrendous to you. You're not meant to live that way. So understand that it's okay to leave and to find a safe place to go to, because you don't need to be abused. I want women to know that, or men. I want everyone to know that. And also, think about who is good for your life and put that out there to the other side. Manifestation. I did that for that whole year, and I got what I asked for. So it is real. It's worth it. So do it. So those are my pieces of advice.